There are moments in live television that no producer can script, no director can plan, and no anchor can rehearse. Moments so raw, so unexpectedly human, that they cut right through the screen and land somewhere deep inside your chest. This is one of those moments. Savannah Guthrie is one of the most composed, polished, unshakable anchors in the history of American morning television. She has delivered breaking news through wars, natural disasters, political upheavals, and national tragedies, all without so much as a tremor in her voice. She is the kind of professional who makes composure look effortless. So when the cameras caught her fighting back tears on live television, the entire country stopped and stared. But this story isn't really about Savannah Guthrie. Not entirely. It's about the man who made her cry. The man whose story was so unexpected, so quietly devastating, so layered with hidden pain and unlikely grace, that even a seasoned journalist forgot the cameras were rolling. His name is Michael Feldman. And if you don't know it yet, you will by the end of this. Because what happened between them on that screen was not just a television moment. It was a collision between a very public world and a very private truth. And what came spilling out changed something for everyone watching. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear is more complex, more emotional, and far more surprising than any headline could ever tell you. Michael Feldman did not grow up dreaming of fame. He grew up dreaming of something far simpler: stability. A word that might sound ordinary to most people, but for a kid raised in the kind of household where the ground was always shifting beneath his feet, stability felt like the most extraordinary thing in the world. He was born into a family that loved him, but love alone doesn't pay the rent, doesn't keep the lights on, doesn't quiet the arguments that seep through thin apartment walls in the middle of the night. Michael learned early what it felt like to hold his breath, to wait and see what kind of day it would be. Would there be warmth in that house today, or tension? Would there be laughter or silence so thick it pressed against the walls? Those early years shaped him in ways that wouldn't become fully visible until much later in his life. They gave him a particular kind of emotional intelligence, the ability to read a room, to sense a shift in energy before anyone else noticed it. They also gave him a wound that he carried quietly, the way people who grow up too fast often do, neatly folded, hidden, carried without complaint. He was smart, that much everyone agreed on. His teachers noticed it. His neighbors noticed it. Even the kids on his block, who might have teased a boy for being too bookish or too earnest, seemed to sense that Michael Feldman was something a little different. Not in a showy way, not in the way that demands attention, but in the way that certain people carry a quiet gravity around them. Like the world becomes a little more serious when they're in the room. He found his way into media not because he chased it, but because it seemed to find him. He had a gift for communication, for translating complexity into something a regular person could hold in their hands and understand. He could take a story that felt tangled and impossible, pull a single thread, and suddenly everything came clear. For years, that gift served him well. He built a career. He earned respect. He stood beside some of the biggest names in broadcasting and held his own with quiet confidence. To the outside world, Michael Feldman looked like a man who had figured it out. A man with a career anyone would envy and a professional life that ran on steady rails. But inside that carefully constructed life, something was quietly breaking. And nobody, not his colleagues, not his friends, not the millions of viewers who knew his face, nobody saw it coming. Not even, perhaps, Michael himself. That is the nature of the kind of pain that comes for people like him. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't make a scene. It simply waits. And then, one day, when the cameras are rolling and the world is watching, it refuses to stay hidden anymore. The professional world of morning television is built on an illusion. The illusion that everything is fine. That the anchors behind those brightly lit desks are living lives as warm and seamless as the sets they sit on. Viewers wake up with these people. They pour their coffee and let these familiar faces narrate the beginning of their day. And so there is an unspoken contract. We will be steady, so that you can be steady too. Michael Feldman understood that contract deeply. He had spent years operating inside that world, watching how the sausage was made. How 10 minutes before airtime, people straightened their spines and softened their smiles and became the version of themselves that the camera required. He respected it. He had even mastered it. But mastery is not the same as ease, and performance, even brilliant performance, always has a cost. What very few people knew was that in the months before that fateful broadcast, Michael Feldman had been navigating a personal storm of significant proportions. The details were private. He guarded them carefully, the way private people do, with silence, with deflection, with a willingness to talk about everything except the thing that mattered most. He showed up. He did his job. He smiled when smiling was required. But behind that smile, something was unraveling. The specific nature of his struggle is important, and we'll get to it. But first, it's worth understanding why someone like Michael would choose silence over disclosure. Why, even as the weight became nearly unbearable, he would still choose to carry it alone. The answer lies in identity. For men of a certain generation, in certain industries, vulnerability is not a language they were taught to speak. It is treated not as strength, but as liability. And in the high-stakes, relentlessly visible world of broadcast media, the pressure to appear unbroken is immense. To admit struggle is to invite doubt. To show pain is to risk being seen as someone who simply cannot be relied upon. So Michael did what so many people do. He contained it. He compartmentalized with the precision of someone who has had years of practice. And he told himself the same story that people in pain often tell themselves, that he would get through it, that it would pass, that one more day of holding it together would somehow be enough. But the body keeps a record. The soul keeps a record. And eventually, the record demands to be read. The moment that brought everything into the open didn't happen in a moment of crisis. It happened in an ordinary conversation. Because that is often how it works. You are not broken by the enormous thing. You are undone by the gentle one. A question asked with real kindness. A glance that sees through the armor. A moment of unexpected grace that makes the armor suddenly feel too heavy to hold. Savannah Guthrie, in her trademark way, asked a question she probably thought was simple. And Michael Feldman's answer changed everything. What? Savannah didn't know. What almost no one in that studio knew was the specific weight that Michael Feldman had been carrying in the weeks leading up to that conversation. It had started, as so many of life's great upheavals do, quietly and without warning. There had been a health scare, not a minor one, the kind that arrives in the form of a phone call from a doctor, whose voice is just a fraction too careful, too measured, too deliberate, and in that careful measurement, communicates everything. Michael had received that call. He had sat with that information alone, in the way that people who are used to being strong sit with things, silently, stoically, in a room by themselves, letting the news settle into their bones before deciding what to do with it. The diagnosis was not a death sentence, but it was a reckoning. It was the kind of medical news that quietly reorganizes a person's entire interior life, that makes them look at their calendar differently, look at their relationships differently, look at their own face in the mirror with new and unfamiliar questions. It forces a conversation with yourself that you have been postponing, perhaps for years. A conversation about what you have given, what you have withheld, what you have loved, and what you have been too afraid to say out loud. Michael began having that conversation, quietly, internally, while the cameras rolled and the broadcasts aired and the world continued its ordinary business around him. He was somewhere else entirely, sifting through his own life with the particular urgency of a man who now understood, viscerally, that time was not infinite. What that internal sifting revealed was not dramatic in the way that television dramas are dramatic. It was the quiet kind of revelation, the kind that is almost more devastating precisely because of its simplicity. Michael realized he had spent a significant portion of his professional life performing okayness, not lying, exactly, not deceiving in any deliberate or malicious way, but presenting a version of himself edited for public consumption, trimmed of rough edges, stripped of doubt, calibrated entirely for confidence. And in doing so, he had, over time, lost a little contact with his own interior self, the real self, the one that had fears and needs and sorrows that didn't fit neatly into the bright, structured world of morning television. He had also, in ways he was only beginning to understand, built walls between himself and the people closest to him. Not because he didn't love them, not because he didn't trust them, but because the habit of containment is a powerful one, and habits that begin as protection often become prisons without us ever noticing the door swinging shut. The health scare had become, in the strangest and most unexpected way, a gift. It had forced open a door he had been keeping carefully closed, and what was waiting on the other side of that door was not darkness. It was himself. All of it, the grief, the love, the regret, the gratitude, all of it, patient and waiting, ready for him to finally come home. The day of the broadcast started like any other. The makeup chairs, the earpieces, the rundown of segments, the quiet, clockwork pre-show choreography that morning television runs on without fail. Michael was present, as he always was, professional, as he always was, and still carrying his interior storm, as he had been for weeks, without a single external sign that anything was different. Savannah Guthrie arrived with the energy she always brings, bright, focused, genuinely warm in the way that certain people are warm, not as performance, but as nature. She and Michael had a professional rapport built over years of working in the same orbit, the kind of collegial warmth that develops between people who have weathered many long days and live broadcasts together. They knew each other in the shorthand way that colleagues know each other, which is to say, well enough, but not completely. The segment they were doing was not, on its surface, particularly emotional. It was a conversation about change, about reinvention, about the things that happen to people in the middle of their lives, that alter the course of everything that follows. A topic chosen by producers for its broad appeal, its relatability, its human interest angle. Nobody in that studio expected it to become what it became. But then Savannah asked the question. Simple, genuine. She looked at Michael with those steady, perceptive eyes and asked, in her own words, with her own specific warmth, what it felt like to face something that fundamentally changes the way you see your own life. Michael Feldman paused. It was not a long pause, perhaps 2 or 3 seconds on camera, barely perceptible to a casual viewer. But in the world of live television, where every second is managed and every silence is filled, those 2 or 3 seconds were enormous. Something moved across his face, something unscripted, something completely unguarded, and then he began to speak. He didn't deliver a polished answer. He didn't reach for the professionally appropriate, emotionally managed response that years of media training would have prepared him to give. Instead, something else happened, something realer. He spoke with the voice of someone who had stopped performing, who had, in that particular moment, simply chosen truth over composure. He talked about the phone call. He talked about sitting alone with news he didn't yet know how to carry. He talked about realizing, in a way that felt genuinely new, how much time he had spent building a version of himself designed for other people's comfort, rather than his own. He talked about the walls, about the habit of silence, about the particular loneliness of being a person who is always used to being strong. And as he spoke, something extraordinary happened at that anchor desk. Savannah Guthrie, one of the most composed professionals in American broadcasting, felt her eyes fill with tears. She didn't look away. She didn't reach for composure. She simply sat with what she was hearing and let it land. And the cameras caught every single second of it. What happened after that broadcast aired was something the team behind the show had not prepared for and could not have anticipated. The clip moved, not in the algorithmic, manufactured way that content is often engineered to move, but organically, person to person, in the way that only truly human things travel. People sent it to their siblings. They texted it to their parents. They posted it with captions that said simply, "Watch this. You need to watch this." Because what Michael Feldman had done, without intending to, without strategizing or calculating a single moment, was give language to something that enormous numbers of people were carrying inside themselves, without a name for it. The specific experience of building walls you didn't mean to build, of performing strength until you forgot what you actually felt, of receiving news or reaching a moment that suddenly makes all the performance feel exhausting and completely unnecessary. His phone, he later described, became something he could barely manage. Messages from strangers, from former colleagues, from people he hadn't spoken to in years, all saying some version of the same thing. I didn't know anyone else felt that way. Thank you for saying it out loud. That is the power of a moment of genuine human honesty in a world oversaturated with performance. It cuts through everything. It reminds people of what is real, and it creates a kind of communion, a sudden, unexpected recognition between strangers who realize they are not nearly as alone as they thought. But the story did not end with the broadcast. For Michael Feldman, in many ways, it was only just beginning. The public response to his moment of vulnerability created a new kind of pressure, a different, unfamiliar kind of visibility. Suddenly, the man who had spent years carefully managing his public image was known. Almost overnight, for the moment he stopped managing it entirely. There was something deeply beautiful in that irony, and something that required its own careful navigation. He began speaking more openly about his health journey, not with the polish of a prepared statement, but with the ongoing honesty of someone who had decided, definitively, that the walls were coming down. He spoke with doctors, with therapists, with the people in his life he had been keeping a careful distance. He allowed himself to be seen in the fuller, messier, truer way he had spent years actively avoiding. What he found on the other side of that openness was not chaos. It was connection. Real, sustaining, substantive connection, the kind that the performing, carefully contained version of himself had never been able to access. And alongside the connection came something else entirely. Something that surprised him more than anything: relief. Profound, bone-deep relief. The kind that comes when you finally set down something heavy you've been carrying so long. You forgot what your hands felt like. Empty. He was not cured. He was not suddenly transformed into a different person. But he was, for the first time in a very long time, recognizably himself. There is something about Michael Feldman's story that refuses to stay neatly on the screen. Where it began, it follows you. It asks you something. Maybe it asks you about the walls you've built, the ones that started as protection and slowly became habit. Maybe it asks you about the story you tell the world versus the one you tell yourself. In the quiet hours, maybe it simply asks you to consider what might happen if, just once, you let someone ask you a real question and you answered it with something true. Savannah Guthrie cried because she recognized something. Not weakness, not failure. She recognized courage in its quietest, most unguarded form. The courage of a person who finally stopped performing and started speaking. We live in a world that rewards composure and punishes vulnerability, that teaches us to manage our images before we ever manage our hearts. Michael Feldman's moment was a powerful reminder that the bravest thing a person can do is simply be honest about their fear, their pain, their uncertainty, in a world that would always prefer a tittier, cleaner story. If this moved you, if it reminded you of something you've been carrying quietly, sit with that for a moment. You don't have to broadcast it. You don't have to share a clip or send a message. But maybe, just maybe, let one person in. Let one honest answer replace a polished one. That's how the walls come down, quietly, one real moment at a time.